Today I'm going to be talking about designing for the human body in XR. So for those of us working within design, we are seeing these fundamental changes in our relationship with the digital world. And one of these shifts is from mobile computing into spatial computing. So with mobile computing, we're given this extreme portability of our device, yet we're confined to a certain amount of real estate on our screens. So this two-dimensional form factor reduces our body-based interactions down to the way in which our fingertip interacts with a piece of glass. Spatial computing changes this. Advances in computing with machine learning, artificial intelligence, advances in rendering and display technology, coupled with input methods such as voice and gesture, they really allow us to go beyond this notion of a contained interface. We can now, as designers, use the space around us as our medium to interact with technology. So with our physical environment blended and embedded with digital technology, we are now beginning to see our whole world become an interface. So I'm curious, and how does this change our work as designers? I do feel that digital interaction is now, first and foremost, an embodied experience. Spatial computing places the body as an input mechanism, front and center, to experience the world in an active and practical way. And we see, for example, the involvement with the body with these new types of input. So from more passive input methods such as EEG, heart rate, to more fully aware and engaged inputs such as hand gestures and full body gestures, we as designers are presented with a new range of interaction modalities which engage the body and mind. So how do designers embrace this shift and begin to think about the human body in designing experiences? These new inputs and possibilities for interaction do represent a big shift for designers, especially those who have come from a more traditional two-dimensional interface background. I think now design does require more than an understanding of pixels on a screen. It requires an understanding of the body in space over time. And as an interaction designer transitioning into this space, I'm thinking, okay, what are the other fields of study that deal with this on a regular basis? So if we begin to list these out, we get things like industrial design, architecture, anatomy, and if we begin to group these, we see something interesting. We see at the center this overlap between interaction design for XR as well as dance and choreography. And this is something especially interesting to me because in addition to my work as an interaction designer, I do also have a background in dance and choreography. And understanding the interplay between body, space, and time are absolutely crucial for this art form. So from my background as a dancer and choreographer, I believe there is a wealth of knowledge from the field of dance to inform interaction design as we transition into designing for the body. So how can dance help designers create XR experiences? Today, I want to share some main concepts from the field of dance and how they relate to interaction design, and those four are body, space, shape, and effort. And most of this terminology is derived from a framework called Laban movement analysis, developed in the early 1900s by a gentleman named Rudolf Laban. And he created a system to analyze, describe, and document movement. And this framework that he created, it was not only utilized within the field of dance, but it was also utilized within other business practices and factories as well. So if we look at the first two concepts, body and space, what we're really looking at is how does the body take up space and how is the body related to its environment? And one main concept here is this idea of the kinesphere. So in general, dancers have a keen awareness of their own physical bodies in space. And a dancer would understand their own personal space, otherwise known as their kinesphere. So the kinesphere formally refers to the space around someone within reach without changing one's place. It has also been referred to as the gestural space or body space or workspace in the field of human factors and ergonomics. So a great visual representation of this is Google's Tilt Brush. And in this experience, a user is given complete freedom to explore a full range of movement possibilities within a three-dimensional environment. And it also offers this rich visual feedback with different colors, textures, and shapes. So the kinesphere represents our personal space, but can also be broken up more granularly into the near-reach kinesphere, actions that are closer to the body, the mid-reach kinesphere, which are actions about, I would say, an elbow's distance away from the body, and far-reach kinesphere, which is reaching to kind of the ends of the space. And depending on the type of movement performed, it can also be broken up into low-level, mid-level, and high-level movement. And we can begin to see how certain interactions may fall into these categories. So for instance, if I'm checking a virtual watch for notifications, or if I'm using my whole body to paint a sculpture in Tilt Brush, we can begin to see the continuum and the degree of involvement of the body. So over time, I feel that design will become more contextual and personalized, and frameworks such as spatial categorization helps designers navigate this complexity of spatial interactions. So I can use these zones to design for different types of experiences. For example, if I'm designing a digital experience in an autonomous vehicle versus designing an experience when walking through an amusement park, I can use these zones of spatial interaction to determine what areas may or may not be appropriate given certain contexts. Another concept I want to introduce you today is that of Laban notation. So when looking at how dancers and choreographers document movement in space, frameworks have existed for decades. And one framework is called Laban notation, which is effectively, I would say, kind of like the sheet music of dance. So through a system of notation, Laban has given each body part a specific symbol differentiating right and left sides of the body. And you can see that in this diagram on the right. So Laban uses these symbols as well as different shapes. So on the left-hand side here, you can see he's identified certain shapes for directionality as well as levels. And similar to sheet music, these symbols and shapes are combined together to kind of create a score. So you can see on the right-hand side of this image a couple examples of what that would look like. The beauty of a system such as Laban notation is that it can be as simple or as complex as needed. So documenting a progression of steps or everything from full body movement to nuances in hand positions is all possible. So as we begin to see more nuanced interactions with the body, creating a system for describing and documenting that movement will become crucial in order for designers to start to speak the same language. The next two concepts are shape and effort. And when we talk about shape and effort, what we're talking about is how the body forms in relation to space and what are the qualities of movement that we can talk about. So shape qualities refer to how the body moves in relationship to the spatial dimensions, and they are rising, sinking, advancing, retreating, spreading, and enclosing. And this image right here just illustrates how these are grouped together and then put on these spatial dimensions. So advancing and retreating is more looking at forward and back movement. Rising and sinking, you're looking at up and down, and expanding and enclosing is moving away from the midline or moving towards the midline. So shape qualities can really help designers understand and describe movement as it relates to spatial trajectory. So how can designers utilize these terms? An example of an advancing interaction would be shaking hands to make friends in Rec Room. A spreading interaction we can see in this leap motion experience blocks where you're moving both hands away from the midline to create an object. And a sinking interaction we can also see in this leap motion experience where the movement is primarily on a downward trajectory and in the vertical plane. So we can begin to see how we can utilize this terminology and describe movement as it relates to spatial trajectory. The last big concept I want to introduce to you is effort qualities. And effort qualities differ from shape qualities in that they identify the type of energy used in movement. So if I were to give someone a high five or reach for a cup of coffee on a table, I would be relying on the same body mechanics, which would be the extension of my arm. But the way in which I perform the action would differ. So Laban created a system for this called his theory of effort. Laban's theory of effort provides a framework for the inner intention of movement. So this covers not what the movement is, but how the movement is performed. So there's two things here I want to talk about, which are effort qualities and effort actions. So effort qualities concern the dynamics of movement, and there's 8 of them: indirect, direct, light, strong, sudden, sustained, and free and bound. And they are acting as polar opposites of each other, and they are illustrated in this diagram on the right. When we put several effort qualities together, they become an effort action. So these are things like punch, slash, dab, flick, press, ring, glide, and float. And as you can see, the diagram on the previous slide can be used to then illustrate the combination of qualities for an action. So you can see here on the left-hand side, you get these new symbols that are created based on the combination of effort qualities. So Laban's theory of effort has been leveraged within academic research in many ways, everything from gesture recognition to expressive and natural movement simulation of three-dimensional characters, building quantitative foundations for gestural models. So there has been a lot of academic studies done with the theory of effort, but I do still think there are tremendous opportunities for designers behind understanding the emotional intent behind movement in order to help with designing experiences. So with that, I do think that Laban's theory of effort can be used as designers to expand our gesture vocabulary. If you see on the left, we have kind of the traditional terminology that would be used in a 2D experience, such as tap and press and drag. But I do feel that designers will have to expand this vocabulary to include terms that will imply 3D space. So using Laban's terminology, I have a list here of possible terms that we could use. And I think this just scratches the surface. We have from body, shape, effort, and space, there is a whole wealth of terminology that we can begin to incorporate to our work as designers. So in summary, spatial computing is first and foremost an embodied experience. And designing embodied interactions is a very new challenge for designers, and it requires a new set of principles and tools and vocabulary to use. And I do think that taking a step back and understanding more about the body and movement can help us break away from thinking in a two-dimensional mindset and really leverage a more natural way with interacting with technology. And that is it. Thank you so much for bearing with me today and listening to this video. Please feel free to contact me with any questions or thoughts. I would love to hear from you. All right. Thank you.